All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another cooking class with Basics Market. My name is Sam Maggi. I am a chef and culinary mentor with Basics, and I'm here to present a nice Hungarian style mushroom and winter greens with barley risotto. So we're looking at a risotto dish um, using barley instead of our barrio rice, which is a short grain rice, which we usually associate with risotto. Um, but you can make risotto with different grains. Barley works nicely. Uh, Farro is another grain that works well for risotto. Um, and so we're going to use the risotto method here. And so barley does have gluten in it. So if you're gluten intolerant, you can definitely do this dish with regular arborio rice and do a more traditional risotto. But the technique will be the same. And so barley is a very ancient grain. Dates back to 11,000 years. We started cultivating barley, and it's related. It's a grass. It's a kind of grass, and there's been like stone tablets found from um, the ancient Middle East regions, showing different allotments of barley as like a payment for families. And in ancient Britain, barley was the form of measurement. So you'd say like it's 3 barley corns long or something like that. Anyway, barley's been around a while, and it's a good hearty food. It has a great texture, some good chew, and we see barley a lot in like soups and stews because it holds up so well and keeps that good texture. So we're going to start with 2 tablespoons of butter. Um, if you wanted to keep this a vegan dish, you could use olive oil here. Um, but we're using butter, and of course, butter is demarcated here with your tablespoon. So I sliced it off at 2 tablespoons. Um, so we're going to melt that butter. And so with the risotto, you usually get your oil heated, and then you're adding your aromatics, your onion and garlic, and so forth. Um, so let's go ahead and get an onion ready. We're going to use a whole onion for this recipe. There's basically two pieces to the recipe. Here we've got the risotto part, and then we've got a nice greens and mushrooms sort of braise. All right, so for an onion, we're going to knock off the top end. And you always want to keep a nice compost bowl handy on your counter. Makes it a lot easier to work. And then, so once you have that flat surface there, we go down right through the middle of the root end, and we'll reserve half an onion for later. And we're going to utilize this half an onion, and we're going to mince this one. So peeling should be pretty easy. And then we're doing a mince here. So you want to just cut along the lines of the onion that you can see there, away from the root. And go sort of thin, and just down to the root. And this way it's held together by that root. And then we'll go to mince. You just cut very closely, and you get a mince right away. We're able to use all of that onion this way. It's just a tiny little bit of the root left. And our butter is melted, and so we're going to pop that right in there. And I have a medium heat right now. So medium to medium low while we're getting our materials prepared here. So next we'll go with some garlic. This recipe calls for 4 cloves of garlic overall. I have the garlic soaking here in a little bit of warm water, and that helps with peeling the garlic and keeping the peel from sticking to your fingers or your knife. And so you can see it comes right off there. And then for garlic, I'm going to take off the little root end there. And then you can slice the garlic as well, lengthwise and then across, and you'll get a mince pretty quickly that way. So the garlic will go in. And risotto, you know, the technique is to get your onions and garlic going, and then to coat whatever grain you're using, coat it with oil. So give that a stir, and then we'll go ahead and introduce the barley. So this is 1 cup of barley. I'm just using this barley I found in the store here from Bob's Red Mill. And I gave it a little rinse, just as you would with rice. You want to get all that, any excess starches off of the grain. So I'm going to add that to our pot. And we just want to coat all those grains with the butter. And so barley is, you know, it's going to behave a little differently than the arborio rice. With the arborio at this stage, I'll usually, I cook it until it sort of goes translucent a little bit, and even I like to get a little edge of brown here and there on it. But the barley doesn't go translucent at all, but you want it to just start cooking a tad. So give it 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, you know, and we're going to add some dried mushroom, ground dried mushrooms to this. So here's my salt and pepper. I'll go ahead and put that in so I don't forget. And then let's look at these dried mushrooms. So these are actually on sale in the stores right now in the Basics Market. And this is a really neat way to get your dried mushrooms, this mycological stuff. They have quite a wide variety. And so what I did is I just chose several. I got porcini, portobello, and what else? Oh, chanterelles in here. There is a Northwest mix, which is kind of cool. So a good mixture, you know, if you want, of the mushrooms is good. And we're looking for about half a cup. And I pre-ground almost half a cup here. And I'm just going to grind a little more. And I'm using a mortar and pestle to grind up the mushrooms. You could use a spice blender if you have it, or a coffee blender would work. But this is a mortar and pestle is a really nice thing to work with, and it's useful for grinding up all kinds of whole spices. And it's the best way to get the freshest spice. So yeah, we're getting a little bit of color on that barley now. I'm just going to take it off the heat a tad while I grind up a few more mushrooms. So I found that chopping them a little bit first, chopping the mushrooms a tad before it goes into the mortar is helpful. And then you just crush them up. And what I like about this method as opposed to like a spice grinder is the mushrooms don't get so powdery. So they retain some texture, which is nice, and you get kind of more like larger, flavorful bites. Um, and having some dried mushrooms around in your pantry is just a great thing to have. Even just for ordinary rice, it's good flavor booster. Um, Mushrooms have a lot of umami, and umami is the fifth and newest flavor after bitter, salty, sour, and sweet. And then umami was discovered by the phrase was coined, and the component of umami was discovered by a Japanese scientist just in the last century. And he was looking to find why bonito flakes made everything taste so good, and mushrooms. And what he found was the glutamate, which is a building block of protein. And mushrooms have a lot of this glutamate in them. So we can also, from that, we can take away that mushrooms also have a good amount of vegetable protein. But it's that glutamate, when isolated, you get MSG, right, which is monosodium glutamate. But it's a naturally occurring thing, and what that glutamate does is it just tastes great to us, and it's in things that are powerful foods for humans, beneficial foods, and that's why we're drawn to the flavor. So mushrooms have a lot, and here we have a nice mixture of wild mushrooms. So you can see I've got a balance of a little bit of powdery stuff and some chunkier stuff. And I'm just going to add that right to the barley mixture and coat all the grains with that mushroom stuff. And you can really smell the nice aroma when it hits the pan. Okay, so we've got our onions, garlic, barley, and mushroom, ground dried mushrooms in there. And these, you can make this great broth with dried mushrooms. Add it to when you're making a broth. Add a few dried mushrooms, and it gives it really good background flavor, richness. All right. Speaking of broth, we'll need some broth. So with the risotto method, you're adding broth a little bit at a time, and you're building up the tenderness. I guess you're letting the grains absorb the liquid slowly. So these cartons of broth are a good way to go. These are 4 cups, and our recipe calls for like 4.5 cups of broth. So we're going to start slow. A third of a cup is what our recipe calls for. And so we're just going to put that in. And right away, the barley will start sucking up the broth. And you just cook that a minute, add a little more. And again, one difference with using this barley than how I would treat the rice is we're going in slow at the beginning, and then we're going to dump all the broth in and just let it simmer in. And the barley is a little tougher of a grain than the rice, so it takes a little bit to cook it, and it will stay chewy. And that's one of the really neat things about this recipe is you have the real nice barley chew, which is retained. Okay, so absorbing and absorbing, and as usual, we're going to kind of speed through things a little bit. So you at home, you give this a little bit longer to absorb before adding all the broth. But with the magic of television, I'm just going to go ahead and add it all now so we can move along. All right, so I'm going to bring this up to a simmer and then reduce the heat and just cover it and let it simmer for a while. And it'll take from it'll take like half an hour or so, half an hour to 45 minutes. You just want it to get nice and tender in it. So I only have the 4 cups of broth, and what I found with this one is I like to wait, let it absorb most of this broth, and then finish it with that final half a cup of broth, of vegetable broth. So that's what we'll do. All right, so that's the risotto aspect. So you want to do the risotto first, and you can you could even do it a bit ahead of time and keep it warm while you're putting together your braise, because the braise won't take so long. Or wait till the risotto is halfway cooked and then start your mushrooms and your greens. So I'm going to put this on the back burner and bring out a skillet. All right. So I'm using a 10-inch cast iron skillet, and I have a lid for it. Any sort of skillet or pot you have with sort of a wide bottom will work here. And so we're going to put that over medium heat and add our teaspoon of olive oil. And then we shall cut up some mushrooms. So mushrooms, as I mentioned before, full of flavor. Here we're using cremini mushrooms, and cremini mushrooms are really just white button mushrooms, but they're a little bit older. And then portobello mushrooms are oldest. So white mushrooms are like the babies, and the creminis are the teenagers, and the portobellos are the adults. So these are all the same mushroom, and a lot of times that's all you'll see in the store, and we think we're getting a choice, but we're not. And this variety of mushroom it makes up 97% of the mushrooms cultivated in the United States. There are only 20 types of mushrooms that are actually cultivated commercially. There's about 100 types of mushrooms that can be grown, not wild. But there are thousands of varieties of mushrooms that have been identified that just grow in the wild. But mushrooms are actually very hard to cultivate because they're so integrated with their environment, with the weather, and with other plants and the soil around them, that it's hard to duplicate the environment in which they can grow. And so that's why this type of mushroom is so popular, because it can be cultivated. Now, the cremini actually are high up on there's like an umami chart, and with the mushrooms, I have my little notes here. But with the umami chart, we're looking at the highest is the oyster, and then the shiitake, and then the cremini. So it's pretty high up, and the white button is at the lowest end of that spectrum. So they have a lot of flavor, and so they're really it's for this variety of mushroom, it's a real sweet spot to eat it, and I love the creminis. So here I'm just quartering these mushrooms.
Chef Sam, we have a question.
All right.
Would like to know, do you have any tips and tricks for cleaning mushrooms, do's and don'ts?
In our recipe, it specifies this method, which I usually employ, and that's I give them a rinse. And I'll knock off any dirt that's on there, and then if you pat them dry, and especially when you're cooking them, it doesn't harm them to to rinse them. I know that sometimes with really delicate, like wild mushrooms and mushrooms that you may have foraged yourself, you want to just kind of brush the dirt off. But yeah, I don't really have any special methods. I give them a little rinse and then pat them dry, and I find that works great. Of course, you don't want to do that too far ahead, because once the mushrooms are wet, they don't hold very well. But that's all I do. So mushrooms and well, fungus, the fungi, which is the kingdom which mushrooms reside, is in between the plant and animal kingdom. And actually, mushrooms are a lot more closely related to animals than plants. So mushrooms, we have found, are always the first species to reemerge after an extinction event on Earth. And they're really the building block on which all the plants and animals come back. And mushrooms were an early developer of a cellular sac to absorb nutrients, which is a stomach. So they're the precursor to animals, which utilize stomachs to absorb nutrients. And they're really indispensable. We're finding more and more how important mushrooms are to environmentally, and how they can be utilized to clean up. They've been used to clean up like oil spills, and you can actually weave a net with the mushroom mycelium, which is the part of the mushroom that is very expansive and lives underground. And what we're looking at when we have this part of the mushroom, it's the fruit that pops up, but underneath the ground, the mushroom is huge, and we actually have the largest living organism in the world. Lives here in Oregon in the Blue Mountains, and it is a mushroom. It's a honey fungus, which is edible mushroom, and it is 2,000 years old and 2,200 miles big, and so it's in eastern Oregon, and that's the largest living organism in the world. So anyway, mushrooms are really fascinating, and also delicious. And here we are cooking them up. Okay, so I have the mushrooms going. What else are we going to put in this pot? How about a little bit of salt and pepper? All right. So we got our salt and pepper. And then we're going to go for a diced onion. So I have my other half an onion here. We'll go ahead and put that in with our mushrooms. Same deal. We're just slicing along those lines that the onion shows us. And then to dice, I'll go a little wider than the mince. And there we have dice. And stir that in there with the mushrooms.
And while you're doing that, Chef Sam, we have another question from Stephen, who would like to confirm how many packages of dried mushrooms are needed for the risotto, and how big are the packages?
That is a good question. So the packages we have in the markets right now are these 1 ounce packages, and I use I think I did 4 varieties. And I'm trying to remember what they all were, but I know I used the porcini, I used the chanterelle, I used the portobello, and maybe it was for me that seems unlikely. I can't remember what the fourth, but anyway, I think you'd only need like 2 packets should do it. I've made a couple batches of this today. This is my second batch, and I have this much left over. I mean, you can't really see, but enough for another batch probably here. So I want to say probably 3 ounces, which sort of makes sense as a half a cup is 4 ounces, but I think the way it pans out would be good with 3 packets or so, 3 ounces or so, 3 to 4 ounces. Let's say that. All right, so let's do some more garlic. We're going to do 3 garlic cloves here. And again, soaked garlic to facilitate easy peeling. And yeah. And we're just going to mince this up. And since I kind of broke it up right away, I won't even attempt to slice it first. I'll just mince it. And we'll get that going with our mushrooms, our onion, salt, pepper, and then we can start adding some other spices. Okay, so I've got a bay leaf, and the bay leaf is always nice for when you're doing a braise or stock or soup or something. So we got our bay leaf. I've got some dry, well, let's go with the oregano. I've got dried oregano and dried thyme. Thyme is always complementary with mushrooms. Then I've got paprika. And so paprika is, that's kind of where we get the Hungarian aspect here. And the Hungarian paprika, right, is a sweet sort of paprika, or you can also, it can come sharp too. And so there's a wide gamut, and paprika is a dried pepper. And there's some really spicy paprikas out there, and they're called sharp. You can get a half sharp. You can get a smoky paprika or sweet paprika. And that all depends on what you like. For this dish, any of those would be nice. All right, and then I've got some chili flakes, a little bit of chili flakes, and some dried mustard.
Chef, we have another question about mushrooms.
Okay.
Mike would like to know, how do you rehydrate them? I've tried dried mushrooms before, and I've never ended up with a good product after rehydrating.
Well, yeah, I usually use them. I think grinding them up is very helpful, and they'll hydrate better for you that way. I don't know if you've tried grinding them, but then they'll really disperse throughout your dish, and that's just a smaller structure of will break up easier. I think, yeah, if you're just soaking them, they can tend to be a little bit rubbery, stuff like that. But so cutting them up small or grinding them up is usually helpful with the rehydration. Otherwise, I would, hot water and let them sit until they're soft to a point where they're palatable to you. Okay. So let's go ahead, and we can also at this point add the tomato paste. I have 2 tablespoons of tomato paste here, and I'm just going to pour that to coat the mushrooms. Throw that in there, I should say. I am throwing mushrooms all over the place also at the same time. All right. So let's see. So now we can, we're going to cook that. You cook this for about 5 minutes. But again, I'm going to kind of rush it a little bit. And we can add our balsamic vinegar. So I have a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar. And then we can add some stock. And so here we're looking at 2 cups of veggie stock. So that'll be half of one of these cartons if you're using a carton. There's 1 cup. In this first cup, I'll just sort of deglaze. Deglazing is just getting all that stuff when you're doing a dish like this in a skillet, all that flavorful stuff accumulates in the bottom of your pan. And by deglazing, often you can use stock or wine or just water, and you can pull all that nice, it's called fond in French, pull that up and you get all that intense flavor from the bottom of the pan there. All right, another cup of stock. And we'll let this simmer a little bit.
Chef, we have a question.
All right.
Is there a difference between stock and broth?
Boy. Well, that is a good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess I should be saying broth because this is called broth, but I often intermingle those terms, and so technically, I don't know. I mean, I think of stock, and I guess hopefully this is a correct answer for you, but stock is something it's a little clearer, more fundamental, like where you just take the bones. And we're actually going to be doing a class at the end of the month on chicken, taking apart a chicken and talk about making stock. And so I'll definitely have some good concise answers for you at that point, and I'll look into it further. But broth would maybe be a little more convoluted with some other elements in there than just the pure stock. And so vegetable stock or vegetable broth, like these we're using, will have a bunch of different elements in it, and a stock might just be like chicken bones and something like that. But yeah, good question. I should know that, and I will look into it further. Thanks for that one. And yeah, so we have that. That will be a good class looking at how to work with a whole chicken, and then how to make a really nice chicken stock, and maybe broth after I learn more about it, right? Okay, so and then we've got the Worcestershire sauce, and so Worcestershire sauce is another umami element, and it was invented by some monks in a monastery in Worcester, in England, and you can get you can get like a vegetarian, a vegan version. The original version has anchovies in it, which gives it a lot of umami, because you find that glutamate in fish products. Okay, so we'd let this go, and I think 10 minutes would be yeah, at home, you go 10 minutes. I added the Worcestershire, and now we're going to look at the greens. And you'll notice as this simmers, it's getting a little bit thicker, which is nice. It'll turn into a really good coating sort of sauce. Okay, so I have some kale here. For this recipe, kale, chard, spinach, mustard greens, any sort of greens you've got would be great here. This is the lacinato kale, often called dinosaur kale. Um, really good flavor and a hardy plant. Greens, can grow them all year round. Um, and having a variety of greens is fun. You get a lot of different flavors and textures from them. And so the way I like to get the leaf off the stem is just pull it right off. And works pretty well. In our recipe, it mentions you can add the stem back in. And to do that, you just take your stem if you want that little, it's more food and different texture, and you can just slice the stem up, and then you have another neat thing to throw in your pot there. And the stem can cook with the mushrooms a little bit longer than the leaf. The leaf will cook fairly quickly. So yeah, rainbow chard is really nice right now. And kale is always good. This dish has plenty of fiber. The barley has a good amount of fiber, and then with these greens, it's really helping with the fiber. Okay, and then if I have just some little tender leaves, I'm just going to leave the stem in there, and then we'll utilize the chiffonade cut. I'm just going to stack up some of these greens and roll them tight. And then we're looking for about 2 cups. So I have a 2-cup measure here. And chiffonade is where you just roll and then slice thinly. And so we'll chiffonade across and then cut the other way across, and we'll get some, a chop. And go ahead and pop those in. Roll them and slice them. Okay, so at this point, we'll stir those in and then cover. And what we're looking to do here is really just wilt and lightly cook the kale and whatever greens you're using. And then this will be the topping for the barley risotto. So I've got the greens integrated into the mushrooms there. And we'll cover it for a minute. And kind of clean up my space a little bit here. And then we'll do a plating. But yeah, that's the recipe. I'll make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah. So a couple minutes here, and then we can plate. And I have a risotto previously made, although the one I put together would be finishing up soonish. And here's what we got. Once all the that liquid is absorbed, you have a nice fluffy barley.
Jeff,
Yeah. Yes.
one of our viewers would like to know what makes this Hungarian.
Well, I believe it would be the use of the paprika, which is tied to Hungarian cuisine. It's a real common ingredient in Hungarian cuisine, and often you'll see Hungarian paprikas. All right. Let's top it. And actually, I'm going to grab a ladle. Or I know, you know what works well for a ladle is a measuring spoon. Comes in handy as a ladle if you don't have a fancy ladle on hand. And then you always want to get rid of the bay leaf so you don't eat it. And you'll just top your risotto with your mixture of greens. And there you have it. A barley risotto with mushrooms and greens. And it's really a nice dish for this time of year. The spring mushroom season is coming upon us, where morels will be out in the wild. And mushrooms will come around predominantly in spring and fall as far as wild mushrooms go. But mushrooms are growing all year round, and of course the cultivated varieties. But wild mushrooms are they grow all year round. They really love the spring and the fall, late summer, fall, for the most part. So that's the dish. I hope you enjoyed watching it being made, and look uh, I look forward to I look forward to you making this dish and enjoying it at home. If you have any more questions, you can send them to us at basicsmarket.com. We have a question box there, and for other things, basicsmarket.com, we have recipes, we have a class library, and you can see where our 5 locations are. We have 5 locations of markets where we offer a lot of local agriculture and generally good things to eat and to cook with. So thanks again for joining me, and happy cooking.